Hi, I'm Reverend Wendy Craig-Purcell here at the Unity Center in San Diego. Thank you so much for watching today. If you'd like to support the work that we do here, please consider making a contribution. Go to our website. It's easy to do. Thank you in advance for that contribution.
Reverend Wendy continues her series, Our Spiritual Journey, with a talk titled, Your Spiritual GPS. In this talk, Reverend Wendy explores some of the various ways that our soul helps guide us on our spiritual journey. The talk includes an important look at the idea of divine discontent and how it is a powerful tool for self-discovery.
So for the last few weeks, we have been exploring together a deeper understanding of our spiritual journey. And this morning in particular, I want to talk to you about the idea of your soul's GPS. Did you know that you have a GPS? Your soul has a GPS. How many of you have a GPS in your car or on your phone, right? And how many of you use your GPS? Okay, put your hand down. Do any of you argue with your GPS? Yes? Okay, honest answers. All right. All right. We have a little bit of that in my family as well. How many of you remember the early GPSs that came out, right? We've had some fascinating experiences in the Purcell car with GPSs all around the world. We started using GPSs pretty quickly after they came out so that we could navigate our annual family trip that was always somewhere in Europe or somewhere in the UK. And John and I became endless entertainment for our kids in the back seat because we have very different relationships, John and I, with the GPS. I trust the GPS completely. No matter what voice we have come out of the GPS, and we tried all different accents. We tried very masculine voices coming out and very sexy female voices coming out, thinking that would make my husband trust the GPS a little bit better. No, it didn't really work. Didn't really work. Now, in his defense, in the early days, there were a couple of times that things were a little crazy with the GPS. There was a time that it sent us down a one-way road in Spain, right toward a police car. And that road was so narrow, we could not turn around, so they had to guide us in reverse out of the road. I think they just must have changed the sign in Spain, that it used to be the other direction. That was my story I was going to tell myself. There was another time, probably the very first, when we were being guided by the GPS to an agriturismo that we were staying in Umbria, Italy. And this agriturismo was a working farm. And for almost an hour, the GPS has us going through cow pastures on a dirt road. You can just imagine the conversation that we were having, me trusting the GPS, my husband not so sure, and the kids wondering, are we safe? Are we going to get there? Or the more recent time in Greece, the GPS taking us almost to the edge of the road, almost like a cliff, toward the ocean. And this time my husband was willing to follow it. And this time I was the one that said, okay, all right, you get a point now. I don't trust her. We're turning around. Well, that idea of the GPS and our relationship with the GPS is kind of interesting, isn't it? How much do we rely on it? How much do we trust it? What does it take to learn how to use it? And what is its purpose, right? So these wonderful GPSs in our cars are functional because of satellites in the air and space that communicate with stations on the ground that tell us where we are currently. When we punch in where we want to go, we can see how far we are. They've gotten so sophisticated now, right? They can tell us all sorts of things. We can say, tell me where the nearest Starbucks is on my way. Pretty soon we can say, tell us where the greatest Unity or CSL church is, right? Right? But all sorts of information. If we're going the wrong direction, we'll likely have that voice say, ever so politely, not like a backseat driver, turn around when possible, right? So all this wonderful direction and guidance. Well, we really do have the same kind of guiding system, internal guiding system within us. Our GPS, we have to turn on, whether it's on our phone or in our car, but in order for us to receive the signal, right? The signal's always being sent, but in order for us to take advantage of it, we have to turn something on. And the same thing is true for us. In order for us to receive the signal, we've got to be awake and receptive to it. It is always transmitting. There's always information. There's always guidance and support and instruction coming to us from spirit and coming to us from our soul. But we're not always plugged into it. We're not always listening to it or for it. I want to talk briefly this morning about 3 ways our soul's GPS works to guide us and support us. And the very first is through a particular feeling. And it is a feeling that we often refer to in metaphysics as a feeling of divine discontent. Divine discontent. Say that with me. Divine discontent. Doesn't that sound so much better with the adjective before the word discontent? Divine discontent, because it really is that. Divine discontent. It's kind of the longing of the soul. It's kind of like a restless feeling that we have, not on the surface level of our being, but at a very deep level. This restless feeling of, there's got to be something more, or I'm not quite in my right place. I'm journeying down my life, but I'm not quite right in my right place, and I know it. I feel it. There's this discontent. I maybe can't quite say what it is just yet, but I know that something's a little bit off. It's too easy for us to dismiss that. And what happens when we dismiss that feeling of divine discontent, we never get out what the real message is then, and we wind up continuing to have this background feeling all the time of something's just not quite right in my life. And yet on a soul level, we long for that divine connection. We long for that feeling of rightness. How many of you recognize the name Myrtle Fillmore? We ought to. Myrtle Fillmore was the co-founder of our Unity movement. Myrtle Fillmore, unlike her husband Charles, who was her partner in founding Unity, Charles wrote books, Myrtle wrote letters. Myrtle didn't sit down ever and write a book. There is a book that bears her name, but it's a compilation of prayer letters that she wrote to people who would write into her in the early days, way before email and all of our wonderful ways of connecting now. People would write into her because of her experience of profound physical healing. They would write into her for support around prayer on all different kinds of issues. And so we got a real flavor of who the co-founder of Unity was through her letters that she would write in response. And she wrote on occasion to people about the divine discontent that they felt in their lives. In fact, many of us actually wind up in a teaching like Unity because we do feel like something has been missing, that God piece. Even if we don't want to use the G word God, it's like we know we might have everything pretty organized in our life, or we might be very successful externally, or not so much so, but yet we feel some discontent. We feel like there's something missing. And so eventually most of us find our way into a teaching like this, because somehow we know that it's a spiritual answer. There's a God-sized hole in us, if you will, and the answer is a spiritual answer. Here's how Myrtle wrote about it. All of us sooner or later come to the place in our development where we are no longer satisfied to go on living the old life without the knowledge of our oneness with God, the source of our being. Can you see some agreement there where you don't want to live the old life that you had? I'm not even necessarily talking externally, but internally, there's something you don't want that anymore. You long for something richer, something deeper, something more whole. She says, sometimes when we reach this point in our soul's progress, we do not at first know what is taking place. We may become restless and dissatisfied. We may go through experiences that we don't understand. We may even be tempted to think that our good has gone from us. But just as surely as there is God, the one presence and one power, we shall find that we are going just from one room, as it were, into another larger and lighter and brighter room. The journey is the journey of our soul's longing for a divine experience, for a connection with the divine. But in our very busy human lives, it's not the thing we usually pay enough attention to. We pay attention to so much external that oftentimes we fail to pay attention to that underlying discontent that we're feeling in our souls. Jesus spoke a little bit about this, I think, when he was saying that we were to seek first the kingdom of God. God is not a person. God is not a thing. To seek first the kingdom of God is to seek a certain consciousness. It's a spiritual awareness of the divine presence. He said we were to seek that first, and then what would the result be, or what would the reward be for having sought that first? Do you remember? Amen. Everything else will be given to you. All the other things that we might need or that we might want. And the interesting thing about that is when we have things in the right order or the better, healthier order, in this case being the experience of consciousness first before the manifestation of things, what happens when we have it in the right order is we become very unattached to the things themselves. It's not that we may not still want some of those things and need some of them, but our relationship to them is very different because we are not looking for those things to fill a God-sized emptiness inside, which those things can never fill because the whole is a spiritual vacuum wanting a divine connection. Does that make sense? And so it doesn't mean we still don't look for and dream and seek to manifest the things that might give us joy in our life, but our relationship with that is very different. It's a healthy relationship. So that one of the ways that our soul's GPS communicates with us is through the feeling of divine discontent. Another is through intuition. That's the second, is through intuition. You do have an intuitive voice. You may not be paying attention to it. You may not recognize it. You may not listen to it. It may have gotten kind of quiet over the years because you've ignored it so much, but you do have an intuitive voice. I believe we need to train ourselves to listen for it and to listen to it. I know that every right decision, big decision, every right big decision that I have ever made, I have made because I listened to that inner voice. I listened to my intuition. Likewise, I know every big mistake I've ever made, I made because I didn't listen to that inner voice, that intuition. Sometimes we don't listen. I know because I was very intuitive even as a kid, and I would know that I knew things without knowing how I knew them. And sometimes they were things about other people that I had not met until just that moment in time. And I would, out of childlike innocence, share that with my parents or with other adults around me. And they say, no, you can't say that, or you don't know that. It was like, but I do know that. I do know that. And always, 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 I was right with that. Sometimes we don't listen, though, because we're standing alone in our knowingness. And especially if we're very young when that starts to happen to us and we hear too often that we're wrong, we may begin to discredit or doubt ourselves. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Some of the times that my intuitive voice has been so strong, I remember it's almost 30 years ago to the day that my husband, John, came back into my life as a surprise, 30 years ago, almost to the day, sitting in a very tiny version of the Unity Center at that time. We had been divorced for 7 years. He had remarried. I had lost touch with what was going on in his life. Some of you know the story. He sat in the audience that particular Sunday. I knew in an instant, intuitively I knew, we were going to be married again, and this time we were going to stay married. I argued with that voice. I had this conversation with God while I was talking to the congregation. I won't go into that, but it would make a very interesting kind of sharing over a cup of coffee or a glass of wine or whatever. But I knew, and I didn't have, there were so many other answers I didn't know. He had been married. I didn't know if he was still married. I just knew we were going to be married. I just knew it. I knew in an instant, intuitively, not through my head, but through my gut, that homeschooling our kids was going to be our path. That was a pretty gutsy, really weird thing to do. Boy, the kinds of comments and questions we would get as we continued down that path, especially being a minister, people always thought I must be a creationist or something. Nothing could be further from the truth. Or that I was a fundamentalist minister because we were homeschooling our kids. Nothing could be further from the truth. But I know that those kids could not have gotten into the colleges that they got into had I listened to the voice of fear or the voice of critical others that told me something different than my intuitive voice told me. Most recently, only about 2.5, maybe 3 weeks ago, in San Ysidro, at the detention center, the clergy march, the civil disobedience march, my intuition was so strong that I was to put myself on the line, that I was to be with the other clergy members who were willing to risk being arrested for the different arrestable offenses that we subjected ourselves to stand up for what I knew was absolutely right. It was not a it was a conscious act, but it was based in an intuition that was absolutely, fundamentally, unquestionably clear. It didn't mean that there wasn't some fear that I felt. It didn't mean that I understood exactly what was going to happen. And I also knew when my part of the work was done, that same intuition spoke. It is important that we understand that this globe, our soul's GPS, if you will, when it speaks to us through the voice of intuition, that sometimes it's going to require that we really stand with an awful lot of courage to do what it is that it is guiding us to do. And to know that we may not have all the answers with the first steps, but as long as we feel this is clear guidance that I am receiving, then we take that first step. You've heard me say this over and over again, but it's so fundamentally important. Our intuition is a little bit like the part of the GPS system that warns us obstacles ahead or a clear path ahead, but to pay attention to it. And the third way that our soul's GPS functions in us is through what I call vibrational recognition. Say that with me. Vibrational recognition. Vibrational recognition. I know that our bodies, in some ways, are like a tuning fork, that they resonate with truth when we hear or feel or experience truth. Now, we may have become insensitive to paying attention to the vibrational energy, but it's there, and we can train ourselves with practice to become more keenly aware of it so that we can use it to guide us and to support us. Our vibrational energy will attract like kind as well. There's a reason why it is powerful to be together with people of like mind and like spirit and like heart. It strengthens our vibrational field so that when we go out in places where maybe what we represent energetically or in terms of consciousness is not yet the new norm, it helps us to be anchored in what we know to be true. We really do need each other in the healthy sense of that word. We need to work together, raising our own energy and our own vibration to a vibration of love, to a vibration of kindness, to a vibration of inclusion, to a vibration of understanding, to a vibration of love and service. That's how we begin to lift everything else up as well. I had an experience. The vibrational energy that I'm talking about, or the vibrational recognition, is also sometimes something that comes to us on a soul level when we are getting what I would call the holy yes of the soul. Say that with me. The holy yes of the soul, which sometimes can feel like holy cow or holy, and I won't say it, but oh my gosh, kind of experience. The Sunday after the march, I was sitting here, and it was in this service, second service, that it happened. You, Janet, were singing the offering song as you had it in rehearsal and as you had at first service, but it hit me at second service. You were singing the song, Awakening. This is my awakening. And you and I have talked about this since then. I sat there, and there was an experience I've only had one other time in my life, and it was after coming back from India and being with the Dalai Lama. But I sat there, and there was a point in that song that lasted for almost 2 minutes, which was a good chunk of the song itself, that there was such a vibration of energy from the balls of my feet up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down my body in a way that really felt as if something on a soul level was absolutely, in the most positive way, breaking wide open in recognition of something new trying to come through. I remember being so taken by the experience that part of me was a little bit afraid of it because it was more powerful than anything I'd ever experienced before. And I didn't really understand it. It wasn't something I asked for. It wasn't something I was making happen. It was something I was experiencing and watching happen. So much so that I leaned over to Kevin Ross, the minister who was with us or invited me to the march. And I was prepared to say to him, you may need to get up because I'm not sure that I can. What I know is that was a vibrational recognition on a soul level for me as a person to something new that is trying to happen in and through me. I shared this with first service, but I didn't do a very good job because I didn't finish the thought. I'm not leaving. Okay, some of you may wish that I was leaving. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I'm not leaving. That's not what's happening, and I don't know all of the answers. I just know that it was a holy yes on a soul level that I've only at one other time felt in a similar kind of way. What I also know from experience is that when that kind of holy yes vibrational recognition happens in us on a soul level, that we need to be prepared for the kinds of external changes that will start to happen, that need to happen. When we vibrate at a different level of consciousness, when our consciousness rises, certain things will fall away in our life. You may have had the experience as you have grown more spiritually that some of the relationships that you once had, you don't have in the same way anymore. You might still love the people, but you are at such a different vibrational level or energy that you just don't connect in the same way that you once did before. When we grow and change, if it's a true change from the inside out, things do start to change around us. And if we trust, as I know I do, that there is a presence and a power called God working through me and you, always helping us to grow into greater good, then even if we don't have all of the pieces of how the change is going to look, we can trust that it's going to be for something good, that we are going to be used to step into something of greater good, of greater service. Is any of this making sense to you? Okay, so back as I wrap this up then, you do, just as you have on your phone more than likely, or you have in your car, you have a GPS, a global positioning system, that helps you journey from point A to point B more joyfully, and ideally more safely, and maybe even, for people like me, more quickly. You have that, and I do too, on a soul level. And I've shared with you some of the ways that our soul's GPS speaks to us. Do you remember what the first one was? Beautiful. Divine Discontent. Divine Discontent. Do you remember what the second one was? Our intuition. And the third one? Vibrational recognition. And you have these. You have these too. If you feel like you don't, it's probably only because you either haven't trained yourself to value it and to pay attention, or somewhere along the line you got input, probably from people that were significant in your life, and you shut it down. But just because you may have shut it down, or just because you haven't made practicing it a priority, doesn't mean it's lost. You can bring it back up, and to the extent that you do, your spiritual journey, your life journey, is going to be a whole lot more fun. A whole lot more fun. So I want to close with a quote from my friend and colleague. He is a CSL minister, doesn't do pulpit ministry anymore, but writes some really great books. His name is Dennis Merritt Jones, and this is something he wrote about our GPS. He says, "Joy is the sacred GPS signal your soul transmits when trying to guide you to your bliss, purpose, and ultimately the fulfillment of a life worth living." I'm going to read that again because I like the emphasis on joy. Joy is the sacred GPS signal your soul transmits when trying to guide you to your bliss, purpose, and ultimately the fulfillment of a life worth living. Namaste. Namaste.
Many people enjoy Reverend Wendy's talks and meditations and aren't able to attend the Unity Center in person. If you're part of our extended family from around the world and would like to help support the Unity Center, please go to our website or download our free app, which offers even more ways to connect with the Unity Center. Namaste.